Good morning, and welcome to this morning's conversation where we were talking about mastering complexities, strategies in managing workload and priorities in an environment of limited resources. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, Australia in the future. It's the 27th at 3 a.m. my time. So my name's Rod Hutchings. I'll be the co-host for the next hour. We have the wonderful Jessa in backstage. So make sure if you enjoy the conversation, you thank her as well. This morning we'll have an incredible lineup of speakers, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So let's get going. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rod.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hello.
Well, it's morning here. I'm not sure what time it is where you're all located.
It's early morning.
Morning.
It's very early morning here.
I know, Rod, you're a
Glad I
champion.
woke up. So we'll just start the conversation. If we'll go around the virtual room, and if you just want to give yourself a brief introduction, be fantastic. Thank you. So we'll go clockwise. So starting with Dennis.
Well, good morning. I'm Dennis Hill. I'm the chairman and CEO of IREM, the International Association for HR Information Management. 40 years in the field, developing software for HR solutions, as well as an end user of them in large enterprises. Glad to be here today.
Thanks, Dennis.
Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. So my name is Maria. I'm the Global Head of Talent Development at Betson Group, a leading iGaming company currently present in 16 global locations, where I lead a combined function of learning and development, performance management, and diversity and inclusion. Simultaneously, I'm a researcher at the University of Glasgow, where I'm currently completing my doctoral research in leadership development. So very happy to be here today and hopefully share some strategies that have personally helped me manage my workload and priorities more effectively.
Good day. My name is Julie Quinn. I am a fractional CHRO and uncommon leadership strategist. One of my courses is the Ultimate Productivity Navigator. So I hope to be able to contribute some good stuff to this conversation. I'm very glad to be here with all of you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Susie. I'm located in Canada. My background is that I grew up in kind of corporate, was chief people of a couple unicorns here in the tech sector in Canada, and now have my own boutique HR company that helps with fractional CHRO and other projects. Nice to meet you all in the panel and in the comments.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Jessica Siegel, and I am based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm kind of wearing two hats professionally these days, running my own LLC called Flyaway Consulting, helping clients with talent development challenges, specifically around the new employee experience and new hire onboarding programs. And also just joined a new organization this week as Assistant Vice President for Talent for the Southeast region of a large insurance brokerage called Lockton. So happy to be here with all of you this morning.
Wow, what an amazing lineup. So really nice to meet you all. I don't think I've met you before, so really excited for the conversation. So priorities. So I guess what's unique about managing priorities where you have limited resources? Just provide a little introduction into the topic. What do you think about that? Who'd like to go first?
I'll jump in. What is unique about managing priorities with limited resources, I think, and then within the HR context, I think what's unique for HR is that our time is often not our own, and the emergencies are often not, as easily foreseeable because they sometimes arise out of other functional areas or come out of the blue. And And I think the other piece that's unique for us is the limited resources are kind of slippery, right? There might be resources. The resources can tend to be for intangible outcomes. And so trying to apply resources to what we need them applied to can take some creative influence and motivation with our peers and leaders. So I would start us off with that, I think.
Yeah.
Yep, very good. Thank you.
I can go next. Like, I think working in an environment with limited resources is a great training ground, right? It does make you become more creative. Like, how can you actually get things done, right? Versus when you have abundant. So it thinks it helps you actually become more focused on what's important, and then really think about, like, what are different ways to make this happen. And the other thing, when you have limited resources, there's a big opportunity for development in your organization. So everybody, gets to do more and try different things, because we need there's only so many people to work on so many things. So it gives everybody an opportunity to really stand up and jump out and do things. So I think there's a lot of positive pieces actually of having limited resources. It can be a very tired time, but it's a time where people can really rally around goals together and focus on their own development too. So
I can jump in here. I think
Yes.
for me, the biggest challenge with managing priorities is to first figure out what these priorities are, because it's very easy to get caught up in thinking everything is important, especially when priorities are being put on us by others. So we have to ask ourselves, what value does this project or this task really add? I'm a big believer in questioning every task, especially the small ones. Because it is surprising how much time we can spend on things that don't really add any value or much value. If we think about it, a 10-minute task repeated every day adds up to well over a full work week over the course of a year. So to overcome that challenge, the method I personally use to determine my priorities for myself and also for my team is the OKR methodology. So that's objectives and key results. And what I like about OKRs is their focus on setting tangible, measurable goals that align directly with the business needs. I feel that this approach keeps us on track, concentrating on activities that truly make a difference. And also, OKRs are agile, which is, I think, key in fast-paced environments. So when I set OKRs for myself and for my team, I always ask myself two questions, really. So first, am I just measuring how hard we are working, or am I measuring actual progress? And the second question, are we focused on the results we want to achieve, or just the tasks we think will get us there? And if I feel that we are more focused on effort or tasks rather than the results and success, then I know it's time to switch things up, because we might be completing all of our tasks, but not really improving anything, in which case we're probably failing. So once I determine the priorities, then I estimate how long each priority will take and try to put it in my calendar and set some milestones. So OKRs is the method that has worked for me. I'm curious, has anyone else used this method?
sorry, Maria, can you repeat the name of the actual methodology you used? What is
Yes,
it called?
it's called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results.
Okay, yeah, no.
It's a goal-setting method, similar to SMART.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty standard. I just saw it in the comments. Somebody was asking, and I didn't know if you named it something else. So yeah. So that's OKR and the cascade down. Very effective. That's great, Maria. Sorry, I was just going to put it back to Rod, our amigo.
And I just want, maybe extending on that, I just wonder, how do you sort of decide on what's a must to do versus something that's nice to have? Is there a key to that as well?
I can chime in on this. I think Julie really hit on this. It's hard when we work in roles that we're servicing an organization, because ultimately our time is not our own, and very quickly other people's priorities can become our priorities. So I always try to default to what are the main objectives and business goals for the organization? And is the ask that's being made going to move those things forward? And if the answer is yes, then let's rally and figure out a way to make it happen. And if the answer is maybe not the most aligned ask, then it's probably something that just isn't going to be addressed right now. But being able to fall back on that as your reasoning of, hey, your ask was for this. And if we look at what our main objectives are as a business for this year, that doesn't necessarily really align with that and support that. So for that reason, I'm not able to support that initiative on your behalf. So I think it not only can serve as your North Star, but then also allows you to, be kind, be gracious, and be factual when you're, honoring or denying requests as they're made, because it's not necessarily what you do or don't want. It's really what is or is not supporting the needs of the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Thanks,
that
Jessica.
I agree with that.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, Rod. Am I
keep
good?
going,
I didn't have audio. Yeah, I was thinking.
Yes, yeah. No, you're good.
100% agree with Jessica, and what happened with Julie outlined it earlier. I've done a few talks about this over the last year about doing less with less. And I use this analogy of, what would you do if your house was on fire? Right? It's pretty obvious. It becomes very clear. You're get the people out, get the animals out, right? That is so I think it's a good question to ask yourself, for a similar type of question of if you really want to blow away, what are real priorities? And a lot of times you realize this when you leave an organization, right? When you're wrapping up, you're actually, these are the 4 things that I really need to transition. You're man, I was doing all of these different things. So I think there's a lot of learning when you transition roles to think about how to be more clear on something like what to do if the house was on fire. The other thing I will just add to what's already been said is just, I would always start at the top. If you want to streamline your priorities, you need alignment. So that's the number one. And I think the main piece with that is, especially if you're working in a scaling environment, it's very different than working in corporate. So if you're in corporate, you could have goals and cascade them down and have a whole matrix of goals, and then prioritize, based on, just criteria and just the reasonableness of things getting done. I think when you're in a scaling environment, it's so different. There's so much going on. There's so many asks. There's so many things, especially in HR, getting pulled in all the different directions, that you have to limit it to 3. I like to say there's only 3 things you could do every quarter. And then you need a method kind of to, organize yourself on all the other things that you need to get done. Because there's all the other stuff that keeps on coming up. But you start with just 3 things and then get 3 things done every quarter, all the different groups. That's a million, still a lot of goals, right? So start at the top and try to get to 3, maybe even 2. Sorry.
Susie.
Yeah, I would throw in a couple of really practical things that have helped me and some of the folks that I've worked with. How do you choose which priority if all priorities are first priorities? Which they tend to be. One item that has worked is a little more difficult in HR because you don't want to put, some of the actual projects up on the wall for confidentiality's sake. But if you have a wall Gantt chart of sorts where you can just use colored tape or something like that, that marks out, or colored marker if you've got a whiteboard. In fact, in one of my recent offices, I had the entire wall painted with whiteboard paint so that I could mark the entire wall.
Right.
And so putting a Gantt chart up and asking people, this is a new priority. Here are the projects that we have slated right now. I'm going to have to move some things, and I will need leadership's help, or I will need peer help, in figuring out what is most important to do. And a corollary to that is which priority that you've been assigned is actually supported with implementation resources. So for instance, if, the big priority is get a new performance management process in place, to what extent are the managers going to be freed up and held accountable for understanding the new process, assimilating themselves to any new technology, getting used to the conversations that they need to have. And by virtue of asking, how will this be implemented? And are those resources there now, or should we stage this out? It includes the organization in answering the question for itself, as opposed to a negotiation between HR and the organization. We actually create one entity that's deciding what's best for itself.
Yeah, if I may chip in here, I think you're
Dennis,
spot
you
on
want
with
something
this.
to add?
I think it's really important to manage expectations. As they say, resourcefulness is the ultimate resource. But I think it's very important to proactively manage the expectations of stakeholders, especially when resources are limited. So I think open communication and setting clear expectations from the beginning is key. So I think it's very important to engage stakeholders early and keep them informed about the limitations and challenges of projects and initiatives. What has worked in my experience is to present them with scenarios showing what can be achieved with the existing resources versus possible outcomes with additional resources. This not only brings clarity, but also initiates a dialogue about prioritizing the deliverables. So regular updates and transparent communication about progress, challenges, and any changes, because things change as well. And the scope might change as well. I think it's crucial. So basically involving them in the decision-making process to kind of foster a sense of shared responsibility. So nobody is disappointed when things are not achieved in the end, because they've been involved in the process all along. They know what the resources are.
May I jump in?
That's very good, Maria. I think you jumped on to the next question that I was thinking of, about how do you get the stakeholders to be realistic. And I think, you start to really address that.
May I jump on?
Anyone else want to add? Yes, go, Dennis.
All right. So I'd like to share a screen and give you a practical tool that I've used to help folks manage time. Is that going to pop up here? I don't know if that's showing or not. Is it?
No, I
It
can't
should
see
be a
anything.
calendar.
It is all blank.
I don't see it yet,
Sorry.
Dennis.
It's not working.
Yeah, maybe you can just describe it.
Well, it's a good visual.
working,
That's
no.
the thing. It's a very simple
Yeah.
visual. Screen share. Let's see.
Might be the tool doesn't enable it.
Let's try this. How's that?
No, we can just.
No, it's coming up
see
on
each
my
other.
feedback. Oh, it's a shame. So, very quickly. So, time is really the problem, right? Different people have different ways of managing that. So, one of the ways you segregate, for example, personal time and the priorities involved in that from work time is by just simply setting appointments with yourself, right? And if you're not doing that, I suggest that you try it. Make appointments with yourself and break that time out, because as HR people, we are pulled, as we've all acknowledged, in many, many different directions every single day. In fact, it's probably the one organizational unit that is subject to change minute by minute. And so, long story short, I have a technique that I call the 5-week calendar. I don't know if somebody else has it, but I developed this back in the 80s. Yes, I was a little younger then. But if you look at a calendar of 2024, we actually have 5 months that have a 5th week. We're looking at Mondays. So January, for example, has a 5th week. January 1st was on a Monday, and January 29th next week is a 5th week. So what I've done, and I've introduced this in over 200 companies, universities, and other organizations, lock out all those 5th weeks. Do not hold meetings, any regular scheduled meetings. Stick those to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th weeks of the month. That 5th week becomes a buffer to handle any overflow, unexpected issues that come up, anything that have been unplanned, or just handle the overflow that follows from the previous weeks. it's planning for the unplanned. We never allow ourselves time to do that. And so, and just as a simple point, in 2024, we have one at the end of January. So next week's a fifth week. We have one at the end of April 30th. Now, you might say, well, that's what happens then in terms of the rest of the week. It's the 29th is actually the Monday. That's a fifth week. July 29th is a fifth week. September 29th is a fifth week. And the holiday, December the 29th is a fifth week. We actually have 5 this year. 2 of them are somewhat practical, 3 of them actually. But what that does is it puts people on a scheduling system that then you can use in any project management or collaboration tool. You set the meetings so that they occur in those first, second, third, and fourth weeks. And ideally, if they're frequent enough, whether you're using, agile management techniques or Scrum Masters types of approaches, you set those schedules in those 4 weeks. Now, people get used to that. But what they really value is that fifth week. Managers appreciate it, even at the board level, to the extent that they now have a place to plug in and work on those high priority things that might have been, kicked out, or to wrap things up, to bring things together. I wanted to share that because in all the organizations that I have, people don't think that way. They think every other week or once a month or twice a month. And all of a sudden your weeks are out of sync. But this way, everybody thinks in terms of the first through 4 weeks of scheduled time, and that fifth week you leave open for the projects and the overflow.
Dennis, I actually love this because I actually didn't know this. So this is like, I'm going to go to sleep smarter tonight, knowing about this extra fifth week. And, it seems like a simple task, but usually the best things are, right? Like, and the reality is, like, even if you didn't schedule your time like this, just because of the way calendars work, that you say repeat on the first Monday of whatever month, you naturally will have this buffer week. So it's just even planning around the buffer week, right? So even if you can't block it all out, at least you know that those 5 times a year that you have this week that's kind of like a magical week that you can think about how to really attack. So yeah, thanks for that. That's a good one. I like it. Yeah, January, April, July, September, December.
And then some years it would be less. And we're really given an extra blessing this year because we get an extra day in February, don't we?
That's true.
Sandy Eisenreich asked the question as to whether or not the unplanned task will only be done in the fifth week, even if it was on day 4. No, not at all. I mean, the fifth week is a buffer week. It's the unplanned plan.
Boom.
That's really good, Dennis. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So I'm wondering, so we're talking about planning and prioritizing. What are the consequences when we don't do that? What are the consequences? What happens when we don't manage our workload?
This is such a great question. There's obviously the organizational consequences of quality. If you're trying to do too much and you're doing everything by spreading the, thinnest spread of peanut butter across your organizational bread, you're not going to get the quality that you're looking for. The other piece is credibility, especially in HR. The devil's in the details. And if you start missing things, or if you do something that's, not as high quality as you'd like, there's more high visibility and sometimes more feedback. I think the most dangerous thing that I am seeing, and I have also experienced personally, is burnout. And that is our own psychological resilience, to managing constant pressure and stress and failure, because we've got, quite literally, until we figure out how to navigate, differently the time-space continuum, we've only got so much time. And burnout is a huge, huge consequence, which can take us all just right out.
It's a very good point, Julie, and particularly in an environment in HR with limited resources, there's a lot of things to do at times. So yeah, that's a real point to manage.
I think Julie nailed all of them, and like
Yeah.
the only other thing I would say is that if you roll out too many things, one, no one remembers them, right? So you've done all of these millions of things, they don't effectively roll out because everything you do in HR impacts everyone. So the change fatigue is insane, and the ability to absorb this with all the other things that are changing in everyone's jobs in their own areas. So the pace needs to be reasonable for the company and for leaders as well as employees. So that's the other piece, that it sucks because you put all the work in, you do all these great things. Like Julie's done it, she's rolled out like 25 things this quarter, but then the managers are like, I didn't what are we doing? Like, just send me an email what I need to do tomorrow, right? Like, so really less is better, like with a lot of these pieces. And the other thing you could do instead of if you want to just keep momentum is reiterate things you've already done. So a lot of times we roll out benefits and, it's worth, you could have a weekly, did you know? Instead of creating extra things, you can create extra awareness about things you've already done and already invested in your teams. So those are just a couple additional thoughts. I don't know, Jessica and others, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I agree on that, because if you're rolling out things that the organization doesn't really need, then what's the value that you're adding? You're probably wasting your time creating priorities that are not real priorities, right? Now, I really like Dennis's method. I've never heard of this before, so I'll definitely try it out. The method I use personally when it comes to managing time, because this is what it comes down to, is I like to use time boxing. So I basically cut my days into boxes and book them into my calendar. So there's literally not a single 30-minute slot in my calendar that doesn't have a label assigned to it. And I like this approach because I feel like it helps me overcome Parkinson's law, which basically says that we tend to adjust the length of our work to the deadline we have given ourselves. So basically what happens is that the longer the time we give ourselves to get something done, the longer it usually takes, either because of lack of focus, procrastination sometimes, perfectionism, or whatever else we might want to call it. So this helps me a lot, because then I question myself as well. I question, how long is this going to take me? And then if I see that it takes me too long, then I also have to question myself, is this really important? Is this really a priority? And this has helped me a lot. Also, when you do that, you tend to, personally, I allocate time slots for reading emails, responding to messages, and so on, because in HR, oftentimes, somebody else's priority becomes your priority, somebody else's urgency becomes your urgency. So by having allocated time slots for reading emails, responding to chats, and so on, it helps me remain focused. But of course, the only way for this practice to work is to remain self-disciplined and to resist the urge of responding to incoming requests as they come, which at the beginning is quite challenging.
For sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone's said. I think the only other thing that I was thinking about is, as HR practitioners, we're all very used to people coming to us with inbound requests, but oftentimes they're not fully understanding even what it is that they're asking for. So we really need to challenge those initial requests and ask probing questions to understand what's actually going on, so that whether it's something that's already being addressed elsewhere, but they just didn't realize, or that's coming, but it's coming next quarter, and here's the plan and here's the rollout, and so glad that it's going to benefit you and your team. But I think it's really not taking those requests at face value, because if we don't ask those probing questions to truly understand where the request is coming from, we can't necessarily help to address those needs in real time. I always think of one of the best examples in my career was I'd started in a new company, and day 4, the VP of customer success came to me and said, "Thank goodness you're here. We've been waiting for you." which is always a great start to a conversation. And he said, we are having so many communication issues in my department. And then he starts throwing out names of people, this person, this, and that person, that. And I said, I've worked here for 4 days. I have no idea who you're talking about. Can we go ahead and pull up an org chart so you can show me like where in your organization and how this would really impact, the communication training could impact the team. And he pulled up the org chart, and I think he had about 85 people under his direct command. He had 6 managers. He had 6 full-time managers for 85 people. So it was not a communication issue at all. It was an org chart issue and an org chart redesign. So once I just looked at the org chart and said, you don't have a communication problem, you have an org chart problem. And he was like, who told you to say that? Everybody's been telling me that, especially people in HR. But if I didn't take the time to understand that, I could have gone and just launched communication training, which would not have really solved his problem and really would have been a waste of time for myself and his team. So really taking time to understand the request and where it's coming from can save a lot of time and a lot of headaches.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm wondering in this, I'm not sure if you work at home or work in an office, but what are some of the differences? What are some of the practical differences about managing priorities and working within your team with limited resources when you're working from home, which lots of people still are working from home? Any different aspects to that?
I'm happy to go first, like in terms of distributed teams. Yeah, like in terms of managing distributed teams, I would say the main thing to think about is that things need to be more deliberate and written, right? So this is a big change from being in the office. You can't really make that many assumptions, right? About, you can, but it can get messy pretty fast, right? So I think the main thing with like managing priorities is like, one, developing a good routine to meet with everyone and stay in touch with the distributed team. And also making sure things are written down. So one hack that I like to have, like in managing just teams and keeping them aligned, especially in fast moving environment, is call it the 3-3-1. So what are the 3 things you did last week? What are the 3 things you're going to do this week? And what is the 1 thing or more things that you need help with? And just start your week with that, like, a little pop-up meeting, see everybody, right? And then kind of check in. And then at least that people are working on the right things. Because sometimes, as you guys know, priorities change. Otherwise, sometimes people go off for like a month and then you're like, oh my God, you're working on whatever. And that's so not a priority anymore. Or we're like, why are we doing this? So, and I think like there needs to be some special care with recent grads, people who are new to the workforce and also new to working remotely still. Like, I think everybody's just like, oh, remote didn't work, we're bringing people back, or, and it's just like, well, you have to give it more time to figure out it actually takes a lot of intentional work to make distributed teams work, right? And also, like, if you're new to the workforce, like, you need so much like care, right? Like onboarding. Like when I learned to work, I was looking over someone's shoulder. I had a whole team of people in an office that I just watched them do really well in a meeting, or like have a really tough meeting and be like, oh, and you just through osmosis learned a lot of that stuff. Now there's not that ability, like there's not that opportunity necessarily to be in person, and the dynamics have changed. So I think just helping even in your onboarding to consider, in terms of getting people aligned, explaining your work routines, how you communicate as an organization, the expectations, and just, what does it look like, to be aligned to your job and do well in your role? And what can you ask for if you don't know, or if you're getting lost? So I think that's a big piece. I honestly think this will be the next big trend. Like in terms of, we're talking about manager training all the time, like absolutely. Like you need them to kind of help carry the charge. But like from an individual contributor perspective, how do you own your job, right? And like, how do you line up? And how do you ask questions when you don't know what to do? So anyways, followership. So this is my new favorite thing.
Susie, have you had a request in the chat for you to repeat the 3-3-1?
Oh, 3-3-1?
Yeah, 3-3-1 sounded great.
Yeah, so 3 things that you did last week, 3 things that you're working on for this week, and then the 1 thing that you need help with. You might have more than 1. but I just like calling it 331 because at least you can ask or think about it. Like, do I have something I need help with? Am I blocked with something? So it just provides like the most basic like framework just to understand like what have people been up to. And also you, if you're doing your own 331, you're like, man, what did I do last week? Sometimes you're like, what? I worked 24 hours a day, every single day, and nothing got done. I like just went to a bunch of meetings, right? So like it also holds yourself accountable if you do this for yourself. So, and it helps you not only manage, but sorry,
is this 331 from some book or somewhere? I really like it's got a good label to it. Is this your own creation?
Yeah, that's the Susie special. Just keep on trying things.
Very nice, Susie.
Yeah, no. The other thing for the 331 or anything like this, like it helps you manage your team and have everybody talk. It helps you look at yourself. It also helps you keep your manager aligned. Because you could yourself also not be aligned, of course, right? And your manager might be like, whoa, like, why are you spending time in this space, right? So I always overinvest in communicating what I'm working on ever since day one of my job. And it's almost like, it feels like too much time. Like I used to spend like an hour a week, like just being like, these are the people, things we're working on. These are the projects. These are the business as usual things, right, that I've been working on. And I would talk, about this with my leaders, and it helps for them to see how much stuff you're doing and like how much stuff is rolling out there. Because otherwise they don't know. And then you're just off, like, trying to do a good job, right? Everybody tries to do a good job. But I think no matter what you do or what type of structure you have in your organization, make the time weekly to do that review for yourself and to share with your leader so they can be 100% aligned with you.
Some real gold in what you shared there. Like the 331's great. The communication, particularly we said talking about remote working, is really key. It's key to be building up trust, isn't it? And the graduate stuff or the new people joining, that's a real challenge. So there's some really good points. Anyone else want to add on to that? What other aspects? No. All right.
I can jump in here.
Sorry.
I can jump in here. I like the 331 rule, and I agree. It's very important to communicate what you're working on, what you've been working on. The way I like to do it is in the form of weekly updates that I send to my manager and the team, so everybody is informed on what I've been working on, what I'm planning to work on next week. I think this is really important because then it gets you to also question yourself. Is this really important? How much time have I spent doing this week? Should I continue? So I think it's really important when it comes to, working, having distributed teams or perhaps working remotely. Currently, where we have a hybrid model. So some days we work from home and some days we work from the office. I think what has worked for me personally is have the team meetings in person when we're at the office. And then when you have one-to-ones, you schedule these from home and also focus time at home to get the tasks you have planned done. Mm-hmm. But going back to time boxing, I do that first. So I box my days first and then I decide what's a priority, how long it will take, and so on.
Thanks, Maria. And now I'm wondering, we spoke about that in HR, your priorities aren't always your own. What are some methods or approaches to just dealing with changing priorities? How do you keep track of it all? What are some ways to deal with rapidly changing priorities? Any thoughts?
Well, we use collaborative tools in most of the organizations that I've either advised, led, or been a participant in. The one I've become very comfortable with is Trello as a tool because it's got a nice interface. If you invest a little time, just the dragging, the moving of cards, the ability to just move things forward for people to see, and then they're tickled automatically by the system. I don't have to go searching emails to see if I received something of an update from Julie or Maria today. It that whole push notification side of it's helpful. But I just like the ability to move things around, and people can see that in real time and be updated, and again, contribute and manage it. It's very empowering, for everybody on the team to be able to do that. And that's how we've been able to really leverage that. You know what? We're driving Model T still in many ways when it comes to systems and how we employ them in HR. If you can go into any office, regardless of the size of the enterprise, and not see Post-it notes around people's desks, you can immediately say, "Hey, we've got an organizational issue here in terms of digital transformation." But if you can find a tool, get comfortable with it, like Trello, it could be a great time saver. I just want to add one more caveat to that, and that is, even if you have systems, and this is for the benefit of the audience, even if you have systems and they're not perfect, an imperfect system worked with a full heart is better than a perfect system worked with no heart. And I see the heads nodding absolutely of the speakers, that there has to be a commitment to the automation and the streamlining, the continuous improvement, and you'll find a tool that's right. I'm just going to throw it out there, not as a plug for Trello. I get no compensation for this endorsement. It is really neat.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll jump on that one as well. I can't agree more enthusiastically with that idea that if you've got a system or you've picked a system, use it with everything you've got, and it will be better than kind of half attempts at a perfect system. And the other piece is, no system is going to fix an already messy process. So if you're not communicating now, technology isn't going to help you communicate. You've actually got to communicate. And so I think, I have used Trello, really useful. Slack. I'm now working with a client that has Microsoft Teams, and their planner, Microsoft Planner, works just the same as Trello. So there's starting to be some consistency across platforms, which is nice. And in my HR teams, what we're doing is really going in with full hearts, and we are chatting in the platform. We're asking questions in the platform, putting questions for our HR team meetings so that we're capturing those during the week, so that we have one place that the team can be no matter where we are physically in the world at any time. We are always right there and all together. And it's made such an enormous difference. But again, if you don't already communicate, technology isn't going to help you do that. It will help you do it better, but you've got to put that full heart in there. Yeah, lots of cheerleading and thumbs up for that concept, Dennis. Thank you.
I can chime in.
I think
on
the
this.
technology you're talking about sort of helps with that remote work scenario as well, doesn't it? So enables you to all connected. Anyone else want to add?
Technology can definitely support, but like Julie said, it doesn't solve problems if they're already existing. But if you have good processes and communication in place, it can really help to support those. I was thinking for this question, as the others were talking, of using every opportunity you can to really, if priorities need to be adjusted, right? Like, let's say we all lived through a few years ago when when very quickly diversity, equity, and inclusion became a conversation in corporate America that couldn't really be ignored anymore. And as L&D and HR, that got thrown as a priority on many of our plates and wasn't really on the roadmap or on the radar for Q1 and Q2, but we didn't have the option to ignore it. Because that directive in the organization I was working with came from the executive suite, we were able to partner with an external vendor and kind of buff out a timeline in a way that we could make it work for us. But I always think about when priorities are, truly priorities, when we've done our due diligence and we understand that they are priorities, I will often just go directly to my leader and say, hey, this request was made. It's legitimate. There's a definite need. This is what's going on. How do we address this? How do we make it work? What can we move back, or what external resources can we leverage? I think I won't speak for anybody else on the panel, but I know I'm a people pleaser and a natural problem solver. So I often feel like when things have to be done, it's all on me, but it's not all on me. So whoever you have around you that you can rely on their resources, have them, lend a hand, team up and get it done together. And then really also understand if there's additional resources, whether it's internal in your organization or external through vendors or consultants or other companies that can help you to get these things done. I think that's a key piece with managing your workload and managing priorities with limited resources. Really understanding what the resources and what levers you can push that are at your disposal, so it's not all on you.
Yeah, you just made me think, Jessica, one thing I think is really important to share with the group too, is that you need to call it out. If you feel like you're spread too thin, like probably one of the best things you could do is just call it out. Like you need alignment at the top. It all starts at the top, right? Like if there is like crazy, like, multiple like priorities that keep on growing, right, across the organization, like that's hard to control, right? So like you need to, and maybe when the leadership team setting those priorities, they're not aware that this is happening underneath because everybody keeps on delivering. Everybody keeps on doing all of the different things, right? So yeah, because I feel like I'm like Jessica. I like to do a good job, you know what I mean? And I'll just put my head down and work, and then, but is it the right thing to do, right? Like sometimes, like we need to tell people, like, look, like we are flat out here. We need, and here's an idea on like what the, how I would reshuffle the priorities, or you let me know, like what are your top 3, and then these ones will come now, and we'll wait like another month to do the other ones, or something like that. Anyways, but yeah, put your hand up. Because otherwise it's just constant behavior, right? And I think HR is that typical like place that no one thinks about how much it cuts across all the functions, and that you assign something to like a singular functional area is very different than one like HR that really crosses the whole org. So that's part of our job too.
And I'll throw in on this comment, Susie, a CFO and a COO that I worked closely with said one of the reasons HR gets bombarded is we're there to serve the organization, and hopefully people see us as trusted advisors and partners, but also we're an internal resource that's not going to cost them any additional money. And if they were trying to work with a consultant or an external vendor, they're going to have to find the money in their P&L and their budgets to make that happen. So it's not necessarily coming from a bad place that things get, bombarded and thrown our way, but hopefully it really happens because of the trusted advisors, but also the, it's not costing them any additional resources.
Yeah, like an optional extension of their team, is how it's built. Yeah, no, that's interesting for sure.
So just building on what Susie was talking about, I think in the context of setting realistic expectations with stakeholders, just how do you handle the situation when the stakeholders persist with unrealistic demands? Like, how do we deal with that? What's some good strategies? And because I'm sure it's happened to everybody.
Yeah, I'll pop in there. I thought what Jessica said earlier about the probing questions was really, really key. I mean, a strategic approach to HR planning and response to organizational requests is so critical. So, depending on where you are in the request, if it's a new request, asking those probing questions, how does this relate to the strategic plan? This wasn't something that we put into the plan. So this would be in addition, does this take priority over something else? I love, as Jessica said earlier, something along the lines of, when we do the perfect thing and have the perfect tool, and everybody's on board, what does the result look like? What are we ultimately getting to? And maybe we're already doing something that they can leverage a little better. So those questions, I think, up front can help a leader or a manager, a peer, understand that we're working to understand the more strategic outcome that they're looking for, can help them to understand that we understand their business, and that we're asking the right questions. And then we can give some choices and say, if this is the outcome you want, to what extent will you have the time to support it within your team? Whether it's you communicating, whether it's your managers supporting, whether it's your employees training, to what extent will you have that capacity to put that in place? So just asking some of those questions. The other thing that I've advised folks to do, I use it myself, is, again, I try both in my physical presence with folks and figuratively help people feel like we're sitting on the same side of the table, both looking at the problem we are both trying to solve. And so, for instance, if we've been asked to do compensation equity, let's say, a project around, well, we've got to make sure that we have complete equity by the end of next month. And you go, okay, let's go do that. What I like to do is ask those probing questions. What's driving this? What's the urgency? What does it look like when we're done? And then go, okay, to what extent do we have resources to put some of this in place? Communication to employees, consequences of shifting people's comp. Are we open to what's your tolerance for reducing people's comp? Asking some of these questions up front, so they're like, oh, this isn't just a slam dunk. Let's just, use the calculator and move the numbers. And then once I have that information, and granted, other leaders don't have time for this conversation, so it's got to be concise and quick and, to the point. But then here are three options. Here are three, and I'm on the same side, here are three options where we can get the organization to this. Option one is quick and dirty, and there's going to be fallout. Option two is this middle of the road kind of thing, which I think we might be able to pull off. And option three is doing it right, and it'll be next March 31st that it'll be done. Which one seems most reasonable for the organization? And then it's not me against them, it's us against the realities of the organization. And that, I have found, adds to the quality, it adds to our credibility, and it lessens the burnout, because we're not carrying it as part of our identity, whether we get this thing across or not. So obviously I'm passionate about that one. Thanks for asking the question.
Thanks, Julie.
I couldn't
Any
agree
more on
more
that?
with you. I think
Yes.
it's essential to make them aware of the potential risks and the resources that it will take, and give them options. But I also think it's important to make them aware of the potential financial cost, because numbers speak sometimes louder than any words you could use. So I'm in learning and development. So let's say you have a request related to training. We want to train every employee within the organization in the next couple of weeks or months. Then I make them aware of the financial cost, not only for us to put together, to design the program, deliver the program, and so on, but also calculate, for instance, the hourly rate of those who will be participating in that program. Can we afford that? Because then the moment you make them aware of the financial cost, then you also get their commitment that they're going to participate in the program or the initiative that you are working on. So communication, I think, and being proactive in the way you communicate, and being open and transparent in terms of what you can achieve.
Thanks. Anyone else? Wow, this time there's like 5 minutes to go. I think I'll ask maybe one more question, and maybe it's just a summary. It's just and we'll just go around the virtual room. Just what is what's the punchline? What's the one thing, if people start doing from tomorrow, is most important that you'd suggest? So if we just go around the virtual rooms, just starting with you, Dennis.
Well, I learned a long time ago a great saying, and I've tried to apply that in my life, and that is manage time, Don't just manage change, but manage time, or time will manage you. And that's the problem. We need to solve that. And I think everybody being aligned and on the same page really helps you do that. Otherwise, you get into that thrashing process of the process itself requiring more management and effort than the results that the users and our partners really are seeking from us as an HR business partner.
Thanks, Dennis. Maria?
I can go next. So I would say resourcefulness is the ultimate resource. I think that's what it comes down to. But I would equally say that know the strategic priorities of the organization as a whole, because before you set your own priorities.
Yes, yes, and yes. And I'm sure 2 more yeses to go. I would say absolutely get buy-in on strategy and priorities. Make sure that you are aligned with the business. Just because the last big, progressive HR conference said you must be doing X, Y, and Z and using, AI or doing performance managements one way or another. Your organization is unique and may not be ready for that fancy stuff. So do what the organization needs critically for its strategy today, and get buy-in on that. And I'll do 2. And the courage to say no. Full sentence.
Good one. Yeah.
I like this. And I also like giving thumbs up in real life instead of having the emojis. I'm like, thumbs up. I don't have a tool. So fun session.
Yes.
Really like meeting everyone. Great discussion. Thank you, Rod, for coordinating. I would say just to be proactive, right? Like to manage it proactively, starting with what Dennis said and everyone else, and the yeses and nos of that are critical as you move forward. That you have to make it an active part of your job to be aligned, and then manage it with good communication. Like, everyone owns it. It doesn't matter what role you have in the organization. You can make a change, right? You have to think your role is the most important role in the organization, that it's important. So make sure you know what you're supposed to be doing, right? And then get what you need to do it, or work with everyone to pivot. So good luck. Yeah, it's a life struggle for all of us. So let's go. Miss Jessica.
Yeah. So as Julie would say, multiple yeses, agree with everybody. I would say my perspective on this is don't be afraid to be your own advocate, similar to what Julie said. No can be yes, or not now no can be very powerful. Not now can also be very powerful. But also don't be afraid to be a little analytical about it as well. I always think about when requests are made, okay, it came from this leader and his team's 5 people, but I'm supposed to be doing this thing that would impact the entire organization, which is 700 or 800 people. So how do I, quantify taking my time to do something that's only going to impact 5 people versus the entire organization? And that can also really truly help you make decisions, but also really give you a leg to stand on when you're, communicating with folks as well. So just being true to yourself and making sure that we're taking time to understand why.
Well, thanks so much, Dennis, Maria, Julie, Susie, and Jessica. It's been a really enlightening conversation, and I love the buffer week, the 3-3-1. I'll take those away, and don't be afraid to say no. I think that's really important when it comes to managing priorities and workload where you've got limited resources. So thanks, everyone, and that's the end of this panel today, and look forward to seeing you all another time around. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, good evening, good mid-evening. Go to sleep. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello all, welcome to the next session in our lineup here today. My name is Taylor Bradley. I will be your moderator for the Efficiency Reengineered. We're going to explore optimizing HR strategy and HR operations for a lean HR operation. And without any further ado, I would like to bring our panelists in today and get this party started. Hello to all of our panelists. All right. Well, now that everyone's here, I'd like to do a quick introduction and have everyone give their name, the organization, and their current role. And then also, I would like to explore and just get a quick one-liner from each of you on what is the definition or maybe some hallmarks of an efficient HR team. First up, let me bring up everyone here. We'll go over to Erin, and then Erin, you can tag the next person.
All right. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. I'm Erin McCann, based a little outside of Chicago. I am a 3-time startup people operations leader. I just recently left my engagement at 86 Repairs, where I was head of people. Have been through this lean journey many, many times as an HR team of one, if lucky two. So really excited to dig into the topic here today. And who should I call on? I'll call on Angela.
Hello, everybody. I'm Angela Champ. I'm Senior Vice President of Human Resources, most recently with Alpine Building Maintenance. Like Erin, I recently left my last organization. And for me, the definition of an efficient HR team is one that focuses on helping to create a positive work environment that will move the needle towards achieving the business goals and not all the fluff that sometimes goes along with the role. I'm going to tag Felicia.
Thank you, Angela. Hi, my name is Felicia, and I'm the founder and HR consultant of CPO Playbook Consultancy, and we also have a podcast. I think that the definition of an efficient HR team, I would say, is one that is very much in sync with each other, has a deep understanding of the business needs, and can leverage HR technology to the fullest, I would say. And of course, Jamie.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name is Jamie Conrad. I'm the VP of People in HR at Trust Radius, B2B SaaS startup. I've got about 16 years of HR experience, and we're located here in the Austin, Texas area as our headquarters. A lot of good suggestions for being able to pinpoint an efficient HR team already given. The only thing that I would add is that's also strategically aligned with the executive team for those business outcomes. So making sure that there's a voice and that voice is effective when having those conversations at the executive level.
Thank you, all of you, for the introductions. And for those of us tuning in on LinkedIn, we can see your comments coming in live. So if you have questions for the panel, please put them into the comments. I will be monitoring that and, of course, trying to weave in some of your questions as well. Hearing some of the definitions so far, I like the scope that we've covered, and I think is indicative of something that Erin had mentioned, is sometimes being a one-person band. There can be a lot of inbound requests coming in. So I want to start off first by discussing prioritization. When it comes to all of the requests that we receive, either from the business, from the executive team, or team members at large, how do you all prioritize those inbound requests, especially if you have limits or constraints when it comes to bandwidth, budget, or just avoiding burnout? We'll start with you, Jamie.
I would probably kick that off with what of those priorities and those requests are going to have the largest impact. So given that they're not emergent, right? They're not emergency, maybe not deadline driven, but how can I have the largest impact in the shortest amount of time? Or how can I leverage, do I already have things in place where I can leverage other members of the organization, whether that's your mid-level management team, your executive team, or you've already got comms built, and how can you have the most impact either towards the business outcomes or whatever those priorities are. And then that's how I would prioritize. So this is going to be far reaching. It's going to be ongoing. I'm going to get this kicked off first. Then I'm going to look at what's left and kind of reprioritize from there. So if I can make the biggest impact in the shortest amount of time as an HR person of one, or if I can have a larger audience, like anything that has a larger audience, whether that's in the short term or the long term, I also think those tend to rise to the top from the priority list as well. And then, you can't overlook anything that comes in from your CEO or the board of directors, and those have to be prioritized, of course. But if it's not deadline driven, then I go by impact.
Incredibly helpful. Any of the other panelists, feel free to come off mute and go ahead and provide some insights.
I'll jump in here. I realized, Taylor, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question when I was doing my intro. It's always hard to be the first one, but I think hopefully this will answer. I think I will echo what Jamie said. I think prioritization is really important based on impact. And I think going back to her introduction as well, what is going to make the most business impact based on the imperatives or the goals of the business? So within small HR teams, especially, the earlier panel mentioned this on prioritization. I think sometimes that also means having to say no or not yet. And that open communication with the person requesting information or time or whatever it is really important in saying, I'm not available to do this now, but can we talk in 1-2 days? And I think that communication also really helps alleviate some of that anxiety folks have when they reach out to HR and they don't get a response. I've also been effective at leveraging tools. So there are a lot of Slack plugins, especially now with AI, we can really leverage auto answers and copy pasting and ChatGPT to help us respond to things like, hey, where do I find my FSA card that are getting asked of us despite having written all of those comms. I know that's frustrating for every HR professional that you send all these emails and they're not read. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the name of the game. People don't need us until they need us. And some of those small tactical things we can really create optimized processes to share in either Slack or email or Notion, whatever kind of resources you have at your fingertips.
I'll add, I agree with everything that has been said so far. I'll add that the challenge with being a department of one is you not only need to do the strategic work, aligning your work and your strategy with the executive and the organizational values, or objectives, but also you need to do the tactical things. There's employee relations issues that come up, labor relations issues that come up, people asking, how do I access my benefits? And so there's a lot of tactical things that you need to do. So building on what Erin said, leveraging tools and also delegating, reviewing what you can get rid of. So if you send out a weekly report to your executives that takes you 2 hours to put together, can you either automate it or get rid of it? Do they even use that? And doing a process review of everything that's on your plate and either delegating, getting rid of, streamlining, or automating can help. That's the challenge with being a department of one, is you've got to wear every hat.
I just want to add that it's so very humbling to be a part of this panel, such great responses to those questions. And so I hope that I can only add on top of what has already been said, which is, I'm a really big fan of OKRs. And if you don't know what those are, they're objectives and key results. And it's a performance management strategy that allows the entire organization to kind of row in one direction, or at least together. And I think that when you do an exercise for the very first time with your executive team to do OKRs, they're really challenging. And the reason why is because until you do them, you realize that everybody's kind of moving in different directions. And when you do something like an OKR, you really look at the overall objectives for the entire organization and then figure out, how do we actually come together, work together, align what our goals are, and then be able to move forward without the noise in the extra pieces that you don't really need to be on top of. You have to be able to prioritize. And with this strategy, I've been able to help executive teams really be aligned with, here's what we're talking about at this meeting. We're not going to be talking about X, Y, and Z. We're going to be talking about what are on our OKRs for this quarter. And it really does help people focus and prioritize and communicate what we're up to this quarter and what we're not. And so I hope that's helpful. And happy to share more about that in case anybody has questions.
Erin, go ahead. I saw you came off mute.
I wanted to echo that. I think one challenge I've seen, especially coming in to startups, is that when using an OKR framework, or in the past, most recent history, I've used L10s, which is like the rocks, pebbles, to kind of help prioritize what the big goals are by functional area. Oftentimes leaders will have too many goals, and they think that that's really great because we're touching everything. We're covering all the big needs in the organization. Unfortunately, that is very confusing as you start to cycle that down to people who are not in those leadership decision-making rooms, like your makers or your individual contributors. So I think it's really making sure that those are, yes, aligned, absolutely, but also that there aren't too many of them, because in startups, especially, that's my world, probably in large organizations as well, you could do a million things, but we have to really focus on what are the 3 key imperatives for the organization. How does that impact people operations? What can I say no to, knowing that these are my priorities? What do I give down to a team? And it really, I think, also touches on how people operations, HR, are not just people in HR in these companies, especially now. It's really business operations, right? So we have to have that mindset of leading through the organization as a business partner to that executive team. So I appreciate you bringing that up, the OKR framework. I think that's really, really useful.
And I think something to just keep that thread going just a little bit longer, from an OKR framework, it also helps with capacity issues and goal alignment across the board. When you think about, all of the layoffs that have happened, people working with leaner teams across the board, it's not just HR and people, departments that have been affected. And so having the OKR framework can also allow you to think about it from a capacity and a burnout standpoint, where that, going back to Erin, having the ability to say no, it allows for other areas in the business and kind of functions them to focus in on and be able to say no and ruthlessly prioritize as well.
And one of the things, Felicia, that you brought up with the OKRs, that will be a nice segue into this next part about execution, is OKRs have been around going back to Andy Grove in the 1970s. These are not new tools, but I do feel at times they're undervalued tools. Along with Angela also pointed out, delegation is an important part of prioritization when it comes to execution. So what are some of the other tools or undervalued traits that have been around for a while, they're tried, they're true, that are maybe underutilized that you've seen in your organizations before we get into more new topics such as AI? So what are some of those underutilized existing tools?
I can jump in there. I think one of the biggest things that helps me is having a really solid benefits broker that I can rely on. So they've been around, right? We've had benefits brokers for a long time. Some of them are really good and some of them maybe not so much. But finding that benefits broker that understands your business, understands what your expectations are regarding benefits and customer service for your employees, and then having a relationship with them that is solid, where you know that you're going to get the level of service that you need. Your employees, when they go, they're going to have a great experience, and they're also going to be able to help you from a strategy and a data standpoint when it comes time for your benefit strategy discussions and decision making. So benefits brokers around a while, and can be a really solid extension of your HR team.
That is a great suggestion. And if we're talking about tools like technology, I'll also say it's really important that we look at the HRIS system that we are using. I know everybody has their favorite HRIS that they would like to hate on, because none of them are perfect. But using the one that you have as effectively as possible. And what I've noticed in many organizations that I've worked in is the HRIS gets implemented usually as a rush job because either the head of HR or the CEO or somebody says we need one, but nobody really understands its true functionality and doesn't use the built-in tools. Again, none of them are perfect, but when you're only using a fraction of your HRIS and whatever add-on you might have, so maybe you have the recruitment module with it, maybe you have the onboarding module with it, learning how to use it effectively and to its fulsome capacity can help with some of that streamlining, some of the more tactical stuff that you or your team have to do rather than having to do it. When I joined my last organization, they had an HRIS, but the recruiter was using an Excel sheet and an email inbox to track every posting and every candidate. You can imagine that limited the number of postings that they could actually handle. So when you start to look at using your recruitment module or your ATS more effectively, using auto replies, whatever it might be, auto scheduling, it now takes away some of that transactional stuff and focuses more on being able to do the actual work. So don't overlook using your HRIS. Take the courses that it offers, call your sales account representative and say, show me what this thing can do as if I've never seen it before, because even if you've had it for a while, there may be things that you're not even keeping up to date with.
I'll add on top. I think, especially in smaller organizations, having the benefits and the HRIS partners are really essential. And I found success varying degrees with working with PEOs as well, because they can really provide some sounding board advice, even on the compliance and legal side when you're running across kind of challenging questions, especially when we're working in distributed environments. Having those partners who understand how to open up new states and can take on that burden is really important. And having a strong finance internal partner as well, who's open to having those conversations about payroll and salary banding and strategy, that's really important from an internal perspective too.
I think beyond the technology, obviously technology is amazing. But beyond that, I've always found that having and setting up cadences with the leaders of the business has been just incredible kind of strategy. And by that, I mean, I will make sure to have a one-on-one with the head of engineering, maybe every week or every 2 weeks, depending on his or her schedule. Being flexible is important. Same thing with the head of sales, same thing with head of product, or same thing with your CFO, whoever it is. And those cadences, you start to realize that you don't have to ping your CFO every 5 minutes and waste time, trying to get a hold of that person or whatnot. Like, your cadence is coming up. So I like to package all of that information that I need to share with my leader and say, okay, at the next cadence, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's the bucket. And so it really reduces the back and forth and, being told this is not urgent, we don't need to talk about this right now. It just minimizes all of that fluff, and it allows you to bucket your time with people who are really, need your attention, and they don't have to worry about their schedule or booking. It's just on the calendar. And there's a lot of times where we say, hey, we don't have anything to talk about this week, just cancel the meeting. And that's helpful too, because then we also understand that we're covered, we're good, we don't need to waste time meeting. But I think that those cadences are just so important to the rhythm of your communication with leadership, with your communication with, how you serve your client group. And it's just done a world of a difference in time management. I've been doing that for, at least 10, 15 years. And I would never do it any differently because I have their attention on the calendar, and I don't have to do the whole back and forth. So that's really important for me.
I love that. And that's a great transition more into the topic of execution. Angela, you brought up a story which made me think work smarter, not harder when it came to the sheet. And I think it would be helpful for the listeners here today. What is a specific story that comes to mind when you think about work smarter, not harder in an HR context? Where have you seen that be on that unlocked potential that Angela had mentioned in her story? And Angela, maybe you want to start if you have another story for us.
I have a story. So I'm a big fan of regularly reviewing processes and how your team does work, whether they're new to the organization or whether you've been there for a while. Yearly or every 2-year reviews are really important because things change. New technologies come on, or we learn new ways of doing things. So I'll give you a real life example. When I joined an organization, I sat side by side with each of the team members for them to show me what they do and for me to understand how they do it. And one team member who was responsible for a particular group of subcontractors was showing me that when they did their work, they had to enter similar information into 5 separate Excel spreadsheets. So they had 5 tabs open and they were entering certain information. Then in the second spreadsheet, they would enter in some of the same information, a little bit extra, and the third, and so on and so on. And I was watching this and I was saying, like, each entry was taking about a half an hour because you had to go through each. And I said, first of all, why is it not one spreadsheet? Or at the very least, why are the spreadsheets not linked so that the common information just feeds into? And she said, what do you mean linked? And so I'm explaining Excel, which is a very basic tool, about how you can maximize it so that you don't have to keep repeating. It just feeds the information. You can play around with the data, and that it was a bit of a light bulb for her. Anyway, I'll cut to the punchline. We actually ended up consolidating all 5 worksheet Excel spreadsheets into one spreadsheet. Yes, it was a massive dog of a spreadsheet, and I'd rather not use Excel, but at the time, that's the technology that we had, and it really cut down on her work. So I had one entire FTE who all she did was fill out these 5 spreadsheets over and over and over again. And we really cut down on the work. And now she was also able to enlarge her job, which not only allowed us to do more work within HR, but it actually increased her job satisfaction because she wasn't just working on 5 Excel spreadsheets over and over. So that also helped with team engagement.
I love that example. I hate that for you, but I love the example. There's probably so much process automation that we could think about from outside of even people in HR, probably people doing one-off here and one-off there that could be consolidated. The example that came to mind for me was actually onboarding. And when we look at onboarding new employees, how critical those first 90 days are for them. But I often prefer to lean into more of a customized approach because of that. So making sure pre-boarding is going well, sending intro emails, having one-on-ones with managers or executive leaders, especially in small organizations. But a lot of times that can become really redundant if you're going through a rapid period of scaling. So finding ways to either group onboarding classes together so that they can benefit from learning as a team, from new team members, they're meeting each other, they're building those early relationships, or templatizing some of your communications. A lot of the onboarding tools out there, Greenhouse, Rippling, some of these can do it for you so that you can set up timers for when these things go out. Thinking things like that with I-9 processes so that it's not a one-off every time you're hiring a new person, all the way through to recording classes and putting things into an LMS versus every time you have a new hire coming on board, having an executive leader lead a session on what the engineering team is working on. So there's ways that we can, I think, templatize things so that you still offer that customized, really impactful onboarding experience without having sacrificed all of the time that comes with building a customized onboarding program for each new hire.
Jamie or Felicia? All right. The next question that I have for you, Jamie had brought this up on outsourcing some parts of the HR stack, either in technology or processes. So if you all are advising a new chief people officer that's building an HR team from scratch, or maybe refining an existing one, what are some tactical or specific advice that you would give them in order to scale their organization to meet the needs of the business?
I would start with the technology. Understanding, get in there, understand what the true needs of the business are, right? Understand exactly where the executive team is trying to take you and take the business, and then how to best align your tech stack to support that and help you accomplish those things as efficiently as possible. There are so many emerging technologies right now, and it just keeps growing. A lot of it is based in generative AI now, which has its own efficiency gains, which is amazing. And so if you've got a new chief people officer, if I were to go in and start from scratch in a new role, my first thing, learn the strategy behind the business decisions and the outcomes that are trying to be made, and then take a look at exactly how my HR tech stack is supporting that or not, and adjust accordingly. With all of the new options out there, finding those places that you can trust, whether that's a community of HR professionals that are using the tech, whether that are cool places like Trust Radius website to go to, shameless plug, or making sure that you have those connections maybe through your benefits broker, who is ingrained with all of the other HR professionals and know what everybody's using right now, and what everybody's having challenges with right now, can be really beneficial. So I would start with strategy and then alignment with the tech stack.
I would agree with Jamie. I mean, that's definitely where I would start as well. And I mean, as a consultant, I've done this so many times, and I love this question. I have found that communication is so key, especially when you are growing. You kind of like helping a startup grow up. Many people are going, and even if they don't speak up, they're going to have resistance to scaling up. They're going to be, I'm employee number 5, and we've always done it this way. And why can't we keep doing it this way? And we have to help educate employees on why those changes are being made. If you make changes and you don't bring them along for that communication, you will have so much resistance and so much chaos that you won't be able to scale. And so making sure that you kind of maybe announce at an all hands meeting, hey, here are the challenges we're dealing with. This is what our solution is going to be. We're going to reinvent our performance management strategy, or we're going to create an L&D program. And, these are the reasons why, and here's what's on the horizon, and making sure that people know what's coming, instead of just saying, we're launching a, X, Y, and Z program. And people are like, why? This is how we've been doing it forever. And it's worked. So absolutely have that communication plan, and ensure that your leaders, your executive team, and your functional leaders are fully bought in and on board. Because even if you implement a program and you don't have those leaders on board, you're also going to be met with resistance. Because if the leader is not, walking the talk, it's going to be very difficult to get people to buy into your program if their own head of engineering leader or so on, it is not compelling their teams to actually follow through and pay attention to the solutions that you're providing the organization. So communication plan is definitely key.
I would love to add to what Jamie and Felicia said. We've always done it this way is maybe one of the most dangerous things that an employee or an organization can say, because it chokes the evolution of the organization's growth, and it positions the employee who says it or believes it as somebody who lacks learning agility. And so if I was advising a brand new CPO, I would be talking about how it's important to keep the skill sets in the organization, the employees' abilities, competencies, and skills fresh and evolving. As Jamie said, there's lots of emerging technologies, but there's also lots of emerging processes and ways of leading. And I mean, think about how we want leaders to lead now compared to, 1980 when my parents were working. It's a completely different leadership style. And so you might need to outsource, if you're very lean, you might need to outsource some of that continual upskilling, reskilling, and growth. And that might be technical skills, that might be leadership skills, that might be technology skills, product skills, whatever it is. Because what you don't want to hear from your employees is, we've always done it this way, because you can assure that the organization will be choked in its evolution and its growth. And you've got people with a fixed mindset who maybe aren't willing, as Felicia said, to absorb that change. So outsourcing learning and development at all levels, technical, technological, product, leadership, whatever it might be, emotional intelligence assessments, whatever it might be a good way to, a good bolt-on to what Jamie and Felicia were talking about.
Kind of tying everything together, I think, when starting as a new chief people officer, you have a lot on your plate day one, because that role likely needed to be filled 6 months ago. And so there's been ad hoc and kind of taped together processes to get by. So one thing I always like to do is evaluate, to Jamie's earlier point, what are the critical rocks or the big OKRs of the company? So what does that mean for me as my task list? And then I would evaluate, what can I build, buy, or borrow? So if it's something that is people driven, where I am needed, as my strategic brain is needed, obviously that's a build internally. But there are a lot of buy and borrows, like your benefits brokers, your payroll partners, that you can use external resources to kind of pull off that low hanging fruit, so that you are freed up from for your own headspace and your bandwidth to focus on the big strategic priorities, like building out the first performance management cycle, right? Like that takes a lot of guidance from a chief people officer. Even if you use part of that as you buy a Lattice or you buy a Culture Amp tool to kind of support that initiative. And there's a lot of ways you can extend your HR team by buying tools. Management coaching, for example, there are a bunch of tools. I've used Stride in the past, which is like on-demand coaching, which really helps because I can't always be there to answer questions for managers. And internally, you can build resources in a Notion, a handbook, where people can point to if you aren't available to actually have that one-on-one conversation.
And one area that I'm really happy Felicia had brought up was communication. We, I think, have had a great outline on the types of communication that you can do. Believe it or not, Aaron said something at the very beginning, is not everyone reads our emails. That may be shocking news to some folks on this call. It was shocking to me to hear that. But how do we measure effectiveness of our communications so that we ensure that we're being efficient with those? What are some of the ways that you all have measured that?
We have one of the technology pieces that we have in place is 15.5 that allows for weekly check-ins and one-on-ones and tracking, and it feeds into performance management for career goals and career paths. One of the things I absolutely love about that technology is it allows me to communicate out something and that requires maybe a response, right? So if I want to communicate to the organization that we have a $700 annual stipend for professional development, I can send a Slack, I can send an email, or I can put it in 15.5 and I can say, required question, how have you spent your $750 annual stipend this year? If you haven't yet, what are your plans to do so, right? And so it kind of gives me an opportunity to communicate this out and initiate a conversation between the employee and their manager about what that looks like. So it gives that ability to take it one step forward. So that's one of the ways that I measure that, is even if it's not a required question, what kind of response rate are we getting? What kind of engagement are we getting on some of those communications?
I love that you have that ability. It just kind of like was a light bulb for me. Like that's a great thing to include if you don't have access to a 15.5, even in engagement surveys. And if you have to go back to simple Google Forms, just like acknowledge that you saw this message. We do something similar for onboarding and for training where you can use your LMS to produce quizzes so that the information is retained. And I think something that was said in the comments, repeated communications. People have to hear a message 7 or 8 times before it's actually absorbed, and thinking about the mediums by which you're sending that communication so that everyone in the organization is receiving a message in the way that they can best hear it. So email, Slack, engagement survey, in a town hall, in making sure you're reinforcing that in your manager coaching. Are you talking about this in team meetings, attending team meetings, so that you're kind of covering all of those different mediums as well?
That's what I was going to say as well, Erin. Like, how are you communicating beyond email? The same message. Is it a pop-up when you turn on your computer in the morning? Is it a poster in the elevator for those people that are going into the office? Are you giving managers toolkit for a meeting for their 15-minute huddle in the morning so that they're touching on it? Is it on your intranet? Is it another email? Is it Slack? Is it whatever? Are you saying that important message in every single medium that's available to you? Because people will see or hear or absorb that message when it is important to them. As Erin said early in this conversation, only when they need HR do they figure out, oh, how do I get my benefits card? And so putting it out in as many media as you can so that it gets to that person in the way that they can absorb it. I know that doesn't answer the question about how do you measure the effectiveness, but making sure that you're getting the message out in a way that people can absorb it is an important start.
I think everything, what everyone said is spot on. In addition to that, I would say when I think about the breakdown of communication and organization, I think about like funnels. So as a head of people or CPO, you are the HR business partner for that executive team. And that once you get the executive team on board with an idea or a strategy or rollout, then it's their responsibility and somewhat of yours, to connect with the heads of those functions. Again, that cadence of communication, that's where you would mention it. And then it's their responsibility to trickle that down to their managers and their managers to trickle it down, to the rest of the employee population. I think that when it comes to, ongoing questions about benefits or, administrative or logistic pieces, that can all sit in Notion or, an FAQ or somewhere. You just direct people to their, to that place and make sure you have some way of maintenance to keep it up to date. But as far as like a leadership, because being in a leadership position and the communication with employees, that I think there's 2 major pieces. One of them is at an all hands, and the other is something like a tea time. I'm a big fan of tea time, which is like, hey, once a week, I'm going to be available in this room or this virtual room from 1 to 1:30. If anybody wants to come and talk to me, or you have any concerns, or if you all have a question, or, be accessible. But as a leader, being available for those like one-off questions, I would say that would probably be a waste of your time. Having like really good structure of where to have those answers, where to have those questions answered, like I said previously, like a Notion or some sort of FAQ, I think would be your best bet, and just make sure that it's up to date. So there's that, again, it's like a waterfall, a funnel effect, keeping people accountable for leading, because that's what leaders do. They should make sure that their teams have the resources that they need, and need to kind of push that onto the responsibility of managers and leaders to make sure that their teams have what they need.
Something that Felicia said earlier in her comment kind of jogged something for me, which is I've really had effective partnerships with marketing in this sense too. So if your HR organization is really lean, the one team that you can use to help improve your communication strategy and track the measurability of your comms is the marketing team, because they're doing that with their customers, right? So there are likely tools that you can leverage in the marketing organization to track comms that go out. I've built newsletters in the past where you can see who's read things. manager emails, for example, and your marketing department, if you don't have those internal employee branding resources, can be a really big lift, I think.
I agree with you, Erin. I mean, I partner with the marketing team all the time, and they're like an extension of HR. I'm like, you're going to partner with me now. Exactly.
There's also some really cool, again, emerging technologies around comms and internal comms. Change Engine comes to mind for me, but to make it easier and make it trackable and have a solid strategy, and that also helps. That Change Engine specifically is DEI assisted as well.
One other thing that I wanted to mention that Jamie just, in Erin's way, jogged my memory. I would say is there was a really fantastic interview I did with someone, and she was in marketing, and she was sharing with me that if you send out an email to your employees, like let's say it's like a monthly email, and you have all these links to, here's your updated benefits and so forth. Here's this program, and then you link that to like a set of qualitative data or content, you can actually get results back and see what people clicked on the most. And that in itself is like a quantitative survey to understand what's on the minds of employees. And you can really address it through that data gathering piece. I think that feedback would be really, really valuable and helpful. But that's like one way of also to kind of be on top of people's minds of what they need and what they're looking for to learn more about. Mm-hmm.
And there's a ton of technology out there. So one of the questions I promised we would get to at the beginning here comes to AI. And I'll open that up a little bit broader because not everyone is leveraging AI. So what type of use cases have you seen be successful either with AI or open source information such as openorgs.fyi or levels.fyi? So open source or AI, where have you seen some successful use cases?
To Erin's earlier point, using chatbots to answer commonly or frequently asked questions that are very transactional in nature and don't need a human to actually think it through and give a nuanced answer is the most successful I've seen so far.
I would add to that. I'm sure just like we lean on our marketing resources, if your product has a strong customer service function that's using AI, there's likely a borrow there. Perhaps there's a way to use that buy that they've already built and export it over to the people team. So I think that's one thing. There's a lot of emerging technology that is in process. I know that there are folks building products to help write performance evaluations and help with one-on-ones. And I've used personally ChatGPT to help me kind of start a communication if I'm just kind of having one of those days where my brain isn't active enough where I can be creative in what I'm writing. So I think there's certainly things like that to leverage. Jamie mentioned Change Engine. They use AI to help execute messages for various touch points. So that there's certainly a lot of emerging HR technology that I think will at least be a brain partner for folks when we have a reliance on us to be creative at every turn and also make sure that we're not saying the wrong thing. And there's so much sensitivity, I think, around communications. We've seen a lot of them go viral, and you have to be so careful with how messages are delivered these days. So I think that's going to only improve how we can communicate out to the org. From an open source perspective, I've definitely used Levels FYI to check for comp resources and banding, but also OpenOrg to get some inspiration on handbook policies. If again, I just need somebody to help me with inspiration. So there's a lot more tools and availability than I would say 10 years ago when I was a first people operations leader. I was kind of just making it up as I went along. And there's a lot of open communities, I would say too. Safe Space is one. Hacking HR, of course, is another. There's a lot of things that you can lean on, a lot of Slack groups that you can go to and just ask for help.
So as I mentioned, I have a podcast. I actually did a back-to-back episode on HR technology and AI. I went to the HR Tech conference just last year and interviewed like 20 vendors about what is chat, what does AI look like for them. So it was really, really amazing to have those interviews. I would suggest anybody who would want to listen to those conversations to do so. If they're interested in AI, in HR technology. I think one of the things that, there were so many things that came up, but I think one of the things that was really interesting was talent acquisition. Talent acquisition takes a lot of time, a lot of hours, really trying to dive deep into content and what people are saying in interviews. And I think what's great about AI around HR technology, I think, is the process of recruitment. And by that, I mean, there's technologies now that will help, come into your virtual meeting with a candidate and be able to identify what are the things that you're looking for, and then summarize what was said by the candidate to have a compelling reason why that person should or should not be hired. That's a lot of work. I think also, just on that, being said, AI is not perfect. We have to remind ourselves that AI is not a human, and we have to work with the technology versus letting the technology make decisions. And so I would always caution anybody looking into the technology to ensure that you are also working with the tech. But that is just an incredible time saver, and also help keep you focused about what you're really looking for in a candidate. I think one of the biggest misconceptions of recruitment is that a lot of companies or leaders will say, oh, this person is, in our industry, we should hire this person. We should look at this person more deeply. And in my personal opinion, I just don't think that really works. The reason being is because it's much harder to master a soft skill or a hard skill than it is to learn about an industry. And so that learning curve is fairly short when you're learning about a new industry, but to really master a skill like dealing with ambiguity or resilience, that takes time. And so I really feel like the beauty of AI coming into our world is the ability to take away all of that bias and really understand whether or not someone's example in an interview actually represents a competency that they're looking for a candidate. With that being said, I think that's one of the most interesting things. There's so much more out there, but it's really important for you to, obviously do as much research as you can, and also try not to say, oh, this is a great technology, we should use it. If that's not on the priority list of what leaders are looking for. A great technology is not always like the right time to bring it in if leaders are not paying attention to something like that at that time, if it's not on their OKRs, let's just say. So just lots of great potential here, obviously.
May I add something to what Felicia just said about using AI, particularly around recruitment? It's early days in the evolution of technology and AI. 10 years from now, it's going to look completely different. What we need to be careful about is that generative AI is learned from the users. And if the users have implicit or explicit bias, they're going to learn that. So if they're coming into an interview, let's say, and there's a bias built in because of the users that have used it, either unintentionally, unconsciously, that actually can impact your ability to use technology in a better way. And what I like to, when we're talking about optimizing strategy when you're lean, is focus on where you can use technology like AI or Excel or HRS or whatever it might be, or outsourcing or delegating on the transactional things, on the things that really are, black or white, 0 or 1, yes or no. Transactional, this is how you do it, and it's good. And free up your people and skill them to do the things that humans need to do and that humans do best. And that might be understanding the competencies that are required to help the organization grow. So my strategy has always been streamline and automate all the transactional stuff, get that manual stuff off of the plate, and free up your people to do stuff that might be that might need the actual human touch.
Completely agree. Now we are landing here in just a few minutes, so we'll go through a quick lightning round to finish this up here. First, these discussions have been very much geared towards senior leaders in the organization. So I'd love to hear just a quick 1-2 line advice you would have for someone that's just starting in HR. How can they be effective and efficient in their role?
I think one of the things I would do if I was just getting started would be to take a generative AI just overview course or certification. There's organizations out there that'll offer those, and it gives you just kind of a jumping point on what to look for, how to optimize, how it's used, different use cases, and that helps with a lot of those administrative tasks. It'll help you make help to guide some of the conversations. If your chief people officer or your head of HR bring you in on, okay, what tech are we going to buy for answering some of those yes/no questions, and have it integrated with Slack, it'll help you, be part of those conversations and at least know what LLMs are and, all of the acronyms that are being thrown around. So I would start with a generative AI learning course just from an efficiencies and operations standpoint.
I would also echo that. I think data analysis is something that a lot of probably newer to HR folks don't necessarily think is going to be a large part of their job, but it really, really is, to the point of using HRIS or data to make decisions. And then also, how can you put yourself in spaces where you're starting to understand the business operation and getting business acumen? Because if you don't necessarily understand what the individual functions outside of HR are doing or what those goals are, it's going to be very hard to coach and help managers and leaders. And that becomes a huge part of every role, whether it's in recruiting, HRBP, HR ops, learning and development. All of those are really necessary to have that business acumen that ties back to your people program. So finding ways and spaces that you can, maybe it's taking courses in data analysis or sitting in on team meetings, joining some of these communities in the HR side that really are great partners, and you can ask questions where you might not feel comfortable in organizations doing so.
Yeah, I think just to echo what Erin was saying is understanding the business is really, really important. Before you even start implementing or doing anything, just learn the business, understand it, understand people, build trust, build relationships. I think that is so key, because it doesn't really matter whether you're the best HR professional ever. If you don't have those relationships built with trust and reliability, people just won't support you in your own role and what you're trying to accomplish. So understand the needs of the business, and that has to do with understanding people and building relationships and building trust. Definitely start there. Yeah.
I agree so much with everything that the other panelists have just said, and building on all of that, because it's so important, especially if you're starting out, is if you go into a new role and you've inherited some processes or you've been tasked with it, question everything. Find out if there's a better way to do it. Do not agree with, we've always done it this way, because if you have, you are choking your own growth. And so building on what Jamie, Erin, and Felicia said, do all of that. Build your business acumen. Understand how data-driven decisions are made. Understand the industry you're in, the competitors, how your organization makes money. Even if you're a not-for-profit, how your organization gets donations. It doesn't matter. You should know how your organization runs, and then understand. And in that way, you can understand what your role is in helping to achieve that. Question everything.
One more thing, find a great mentor to help you, right? Find a great mentor that you can call up or you can text and say, this is what I'm looking at. I have no clue. Can you help me decipher and figure out the right way to go?
Thank you. And the final question, we have just about a minute left, panelists, so we'll have to condense our answers rather quickly. But what I'd like to hear from you is, what either podcast or audiobook or book do you really like right now? And how can folks connect with you after this call?
I can go first. I've always been a really big fan of First Round's newsletter and podcast, especially for the startup space. It talks about a lot of different function areas outside of just people. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If anyone is in need of a mentor, like Jamie said, I'm happy to be one.
I'm going to talk about my own podcast, considering this is about what podcast I listen to. I always say I'm a really big fan of my own show because I sit there and ask questions of these amazing, amazing guests. And they're just, I don't just interview chief people officers, but my most recent episode is on a chief AI officer. And what does that role look like? And what does that look like in regards to people? And I just interviewed the vice chairman of Cirque du Soleil, Daniel Lamar, who talks about how do you bring creativity into an organization. So just really amazing guests that are on the show, and would love for anyone to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect and share my advice if I can be helpful. But if you could be a listener, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Felicia, what's the name of your podcast?
Oh, it's CPO Playbook.
Thank you.
for
CPO
asking.
Playbook. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
What I love to listen to, a daily podcast is called Monocle the Globalist. It's a daily news show that comes out of the UK that talks about what's happening in the world, in politics, in other news. And the reason why I love it and I recommend it to people is because even if our organization is centered in one jurisdiction or one country, it's really important to understand what's happening in the world, because that actually affects things like supply chain management, ability of labor, what your employees might be suffering through right now if you have employees who are from different countries or different ethnicities. And so really understanding what's happening in the world really helps with building that business acumen, because you're able to understand the environment as a whole. And also I'll do a shameless plug as well. I'd love it if you picked up my book, The Squiggly Line Career, How Changing Professions Can Advance a Career in Unexpected Ways, available on Amazon or anywhere else you buy books. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
All good stuff. A couple extra podcasts. The HR Superstars Community with Adam Weber. Coaching for Leaders is a good one for business management. Also Beyond the to-do list for podcasts. And then you can connect with me on HR. I'm happy to help answer questions, be a mentor, be a resource. Anything I can do.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all the panelists for all of your insights today. I encourage all of the participants and listeners, please go connect. Please go listen to these podcasts and buy those books. Otherwise, thank you to Hacking HR, and we'll go ahead and sign off here for today. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.